The young woman walks along the stream with a backpack, searching for a patch of ground dry and flat enough for a simple shelter. Among loose stones and thick brush, she keeps stopping to read the waterline, the wind, and the open space beneath the trees. She is not looking for the prettiest place, but for the safest one to pause in the wet forest. She begins by cutting vines and clearing the first young stalks. Each swing of the blade opens a little more room to work enough for long materials to be pulled in without snagging on the growth around her. Slender bamboo poles and longer branches are gathered one by one onto the rocky ground. The shelter still has no clear shape yet, but this is the part that decides whether the later frame will feel straight, light, and stable. She keeps clearing the floor, dragging away broad leaves and separating the poles that can serve as supports. The riverside patch slowly changes from a rough mix of grass stones and roots into a camp area with more order. Near the end of preparation, the pace slows as she checks each pole more carefully. It shows that the hardest part of this kind of camp build is not the tarp itself, but choosing the right lengths and the right straight pieces for the first frame. When the story enters the building phase, the long bamboo poles are raised into the first two sides of an A-frame. From this point, the video clearly shifts from preparation into visible construction. She lifts each pole, adjusts the feet on the rocky ground, and ties the meeting points by hand. Even a small mistake at the ridge could pull the whole shelter out of shape once the cover comes down. The main frame stands a little more firmly after every tightened knot. On a stony stream bank, stability does not come from weight alone, but from the way each side leans into and supports the other. An A-frame shelter works especially well in wet forests because its steep sides shed rain quickly and reduce water pooling. That simple triangle also spreads weight down both legs, so even a light frame can stay surprisingly stable. When the dark tarp is draped over the ridge, the structure changes its character at once. What looked like a bare frame suddenly becomes a place that can block wind, resist rain, and hold a little warmth for one person. She pulls the tarp edges low and stakes each corner so the cover will not lift. These small adjustments near the ground are what decide whether the shelter stays quiet and dependable when the wind shifts. After adjusting the entrance and checking the sidelines, she steps back for a moment to study the overall shape. That is when the shelter stops feeling like an experiment and starts feeling like a real resting point beside the water. Once the shelter is ready, the story moves into camp life. She gathers dry firewood, splits thinner kindling, and turns the open space in front of the tent into a temporary cooking corner. The fire catches slowly but steadily, and a small pot soon hangs above it. From that moment, the shelter begins to prove its value because the build is no longer just finished, it is being used. If you enjoy quiet camp building stories like this, subscribe and leave a comment so I can meet you again on the next journey. Boiling water, fresh greens, and a simple meal go into the pot in an unhurried rhythm. After the long preparation, every movement is now leading toward warmth, food, and rest. Inside the shelter she has just built, she sits on a thin mat and eats while the sound of the stream fills the rest of the frame. This is the clearest reward in the whole video. The structure is not just shown, it is lived in. The video stays with the meal long enough for the viewer to feel how much the place has changed. What began as a rough patch of stones now has a roof, a small hearth, and the rhythm of a temporary home. When the work is over and the meal is done, she walks toward a deeper part of the river. The ending is no longer about construction itself, but about returning a slower rhythm to the body after a full day of outdoor labor. The final images linger on the water, the rock face, and her quiet figure beside the stream. Nothing more needs to be explained because that stillness completes the story of a small shelter that was built and then truly inhabited.